Hello everyone, welcome to the course of Survey of Major English-Speaking Countries. Today, we are going to learn something about Chapter 1, the General Introduction of Great Britain. This lecture is about Lesson E, the General Introduction of Northern Ireland. The Northern Ireland is the smallest of the four nations, both in area and population. With only 2 million people, it is smaller than many Chinese cities. Its capital, Belfast, is a relatively small town of around 500,000 people. But it is the biggest city in the Northern Ireland. Though Northern Ireland is small, it is significant because of the political troubles there. Physically, it is mostly rural, with low hills, a beautiful lake district in the southwest, and a rugged coastline. It includes its most famous landmark, the Giant's Causeway. It is a rocky coastal area made of black columns formed by cooling lava millions of years ago. Legend has it that the giant hero built it to cross the sea to Scotland. The nature of its link to Great Britain has been a key element in Northern Ireland's history, and remains an issue today. Northern Ireland has an active culture life, with many theatres, restaurants, pubs, and museums. The Northern Ireland economy has its problem, partly as a result of the troubles discouraging investment, partly as a result of its relation with UK. Its wealth per head is the lowest of any UK region. Nevertheless, living costs are also comprehensively low, and a standard of living is possible for those of middle or upper incomes which many Londoners might envy. Today, we're going to concentrate on the political problems of Northern Ireland, because, unfortunately, that is what is best known about it, though often not well understood. Northern Ireland was created in 1921, when Ireland was partitioned between Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland by the Government of Ireland Act 1920. Unlike Southern Ireland, which would become the Irish Free State in 1922, the majority of Northern Ireland's population were Unionists who wanted to remain within the United Kingdom. Most of these were the Protestant descendants of the colonists from Great Britain. However, a significant minority, mostly Catholics, were nationalists who wanted a united Ireland independent of British rule. Today, the former generally see themselves as British, and the latter generally see themselves as Irish, while a distinct Northern Irish identity is claimed both by a large minority of Catholics and Protestants. The one thing that almost everyone knows about Ireland is that the island has been divided by a long and bloody conflict. The simplest way of describing this conflict is as a result of Ireland's colonial history. From the time of Queen Elizabeth I, the new settlers, loyal to the British Crown and Protestant in religious persuasion, were granted land, position, and privileges which had been systematically taken away from the indigenous Roman Catholic population. These abuses, during the time of the British colonial administration over hundreds of years, constitute a vivid history of massacre, exile, repression, and deprivation. The result has been a systematic resentment of the British in native Irish culture, which is evident even today. Until 1921, the full name of the UK was the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. Not only Northern Ireland, because the whole island of the Ireland was politically integrated with Great Britain and had been since 1801. But Irish desires for an independent state were never lost. And one of the key issues in the late 19th century British politics was a campaign in Parliament for what was called Home Rule, which means Irish political control of Irish affairs. Along with the political campaign for Home Rule, there were groups who followed a more direct method of pursuing Irish independence, engaging guerrilla or terrorist activities against the British institutions and the military forces. The British government responded with military means, and the leader of the rebellion were executed. In 1919, a group called itself the IRA, the Irish Republican Army, expanded the fighting. In the end, the conflict became too great to ignore. And as the Sinn Féin, who were supporters of the Irish terrorists, gained most of the Irish seats in the British Parliament, Irish independence became inevitable. However, there was a problem. The majority of Irish people were descendants of the original Celtic people who inhabited the British Isles before the Romans arrived 2,000 years ago. Ireland was not invaded by the Romans or settled by the Anglo-Saxons who followed them into Britain. Thus, they were ethnically distinct from the majority of the British people. Adding to the difference was religion. Most Irish people remained Catholic, while most British people had become Protestants. But in one part of Ireland, this was not, and is not, the case. In the 17th century, the English government, trying to increase its control of Ireland, encouraged the people from Scotland and northern England to emigrate to the troublesome northern of Ireland. As a result, the northeastern part of Ireland gained a population who saw themselves differently from the rest of other Irish people, and they thought themselves as British and wished to remain a part of the British state. Also, they were Protestants. In 1921, the idea of being a part of an independent Irish state, while most people were Catholic, did not appeal. On the other hand, they could not go home. Ireland was their home. They had been there 250 years or more. They had shown in 1913 that they would not accept a union with Ireland by organizing a show of force and put 100,000 armed men in the streets of Northern Ireland. Faced with these conflicting demands, the British government chose a compromise and organized a partition of Ireland. The southern 26 countries would form an independent free state, while the 6 northeast countries would remain a part of the UK. This is what happened in the 1921, bringing to an end 700 years of British rule in Southern Ireland. Unlike the other nations in the UK, Northern Ireland was given its own parliament to deal with Northern Irish internal affairs. The problem was that in the 6 northern countries, the population was not purely loyalists or unionists. About a third of the population was Roman Catholic, many of whom resented the separation from the South. To worsen the situation, the Protestants, being the majority, controlled the local democratically controlled parliament and used that power to support their own economic and social dominance in this area. Catholics found it harder to get jobs and to benefit from social programs such as public housing. Schools and sporting events were segregated. Catholics were regularly harassed by a Protestant police force. Any indication of nationalist sentiment was ruthlessly repressed. The resentment grew, and the armed conflicts known as Troubles developed. The American Civil Rights Movement in the 1960s provided a model for those in Northern Ireland who felt they had been treated in much the same way as the American blacks. The result in Northern Ireland was a campaign to regain civil rights for those Roman Catholics, conducted by means of marches, speeches, and sit-ins. Groups of Protestants began to organize counter-demonstrations, and rioting broke out. Protestant mobs attacked the Catholic area. The police were overwhelmed by the fighting, and the British soldiers were seen on Northern Irish streets. They have been there ever since. In the early 1970s, the IRA, a group who believed armed force was the only way to get the British out, carried out a campaign of bombing and shooting, usually targeting the security force, but often bombing city centers. In 1972, 468 people were killed in Northern Ireland, the worst year of the Troubles. This includes 13 Catholics who had been taking part in a peaceful civil rights march. They were shot dead by the British soldiers. This day had now been called the Bloody Sunday, an important symbol of the British oppression. While attempting to maintain normality through a massive and increasingly effective security presence, the government looked for a political solution to these troubles. During the 1980s and 1990s, a lot of attempts were made to bring peace to Northern Ireland, but few of them were effective. During this period, 3 separate attempts were made to draft an agreement between the British and Irish governments that would lead to a resolution of the Northern Ireland conflict. As a result of multi-party negotiations, aided by the intervention of the United States, the Good Friday Agreement emerged on 10th April 1998. This agreement assures that loyalists' community that Northern Ireland remains part of the United Kingdom and shall now cease to be so without the consent of the majority of the people of Northern Ireland. The Irish government, for its part, undertook the revised articles of the Constitution that claimed jurisdiction over the North. They expressed the hope that Ireland would once more be united on an island to a new article that recognizes that a united Ireland should be brought about only by peaceful means with the consent of the majority of the people, democratically expressed in both jurisdictions. Thus, Northern Ireland today must be the only country in the world which is recognized as an independent entity, but which is governed, in effect, by three separate jurisdictions: that of the Republic of Ireland, that of Great Britain, and that of its own elected executive government of 10 ministers. The Northern Ireland is now a quieter and a more civilized place than it has been for the last half-century. The Northern Ireland still has far to go. The economy remains stagnant and unemployment high. Most young people leave for England and never return. But the new generation are happy that the new civil peace at last enables them to get on with building their own lives.